Welcome everybody to Save Travel Week. Now we're hosting this week as a way to amplify the Save Travel campaign. TTG launched it 3 weeks ago, and it's all about as the industry struggles in the wake of these snap quarantine announcements, and we had another one last week. It's causing huge uncertainty, and of course we've had catastrophic amounts of lost revenue in the industry, and this campaign is all about raising awareness of that. So before we begin today's discussion, I just want to tell you a little bit about the week and what we have planned. Now, as we flagged, the whole aim is to protect the industry from the threat of collapse. Now, at the heart of the Save Travel campaign is a letter to Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Transport Minister Grant Shapps, and we have 3 key demands which we believe are necessary and could go a long way to helping to protect the sector. So firstly, we are asking for sector-specific financial support, which could perhaps include an extension to the furlough scheme. Now, without this, we want the government to understand the gravity of the situation, that the country will see thousands of company failures and hundreds of thousands of job losses. So we want ministers to understand just how urgent this is. Secondly, we want ministers to consider a holiday on air passenger duty until the end of 2021 to help with pricing and to encourage consumers to start booking holidays again. The hospitality sector, as we all know, has been aided by the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and the travel industry is urgently requesting similar support from the government as well. Thirdly, we want the government to commit to providing more advance notice of changes to destinations' quarantine statuses. Now, too many times, and we saw this again with France, we've seen it with Spain, with the Bahamas, with Belgium, too little warning is being provided to industry and to holidaymakers as the government just switches off destinations at a moment's notices, and businesses cannot be run with such little planning and notice, and advance warning of destinations that may be in the red zone or are about to be switched off, and crucially as well, transparency on how these decisions are being taken is a necessity for the travel industry if businesses are to survive. We want to drive signatures for our letter. We're already on well over 7,500, but we want more. So we're kicking off Save Travel Week today with a panel discussion with some fantastic speakers, as you can see here, and I'm going to be introducing you to them shortly. Tomorrow, we want everyone to be spreading the Save Travel word and signing our letter to Sunak and to Shapps. On Wednesday, we want to be sharing your stories, want to hear your personal stories of the impact of this crisis on you and your team, so that we can get the message across to Westminster about just how devastating the last few months have been for this industry. Thursday is Write to Your Local MP Day. We've created a template letter and a link as to how to find your MP. And the idea is that if we can get the message across to local MPs about the economic impact on businesses in their area, they are more likely to want to push this message onto senior ministers to show just how grave this situation is. And on Friday, we want to encourage the industry to reach out and to support colleagues, to support each other. We have written at TTG at length about the devastating impact of the toll of this crisis has had on countless individuals. You know, we know about the mental health struggle for many people in the sector right now. So please, if you're struggling, please don't do it in silence. And if you are struggling, ask for help. And for everyone else as well, reach out to support your industry colleagues. Today, though, is the launch of #Save Travel Week, and we thought it might make sense to have a discussion with representatives from different areas of the industry to discuss just why the Save Travel campaign is so urgent. I can see someone's joining us. I'm not sure why someone is joining us, so I'm just going to remove them. But I just want to introduce you, before somebody else tries to join the discussion, to Giles Hawke, CEO of Cosmos Tours and Cruises and Avalon Waterways UK, to Chris Wright, Managing Director at Sunville, and to Kelly Cooks, Leisure Director at Advantage Travel Partnership. And thank you, all of you, for joining me here this morning. Just a reminder for those of you watching on Zoom and on Facebook, please do drop any suggestions, comments, questions you might have in the chat, and we'll put those to the panel as well. But I just want to begin this morning really with a look at the challenges facing the sector and why we're in this predicament. Do each of you believe the government has failed the UK travel industry, or is it just facing its own struggle, you know, to support so many industries? But it does seem that travel is now one of the last sectors to restart. What more can the government be doing to support it? And yeah, do you feel it's failed? Giles, I saw you smiling as I asked that question, so I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, I do think we are being let down badly by the government, by the approach that they're taking. I think, you know, when the furlough scheme was introduced back at the end of March, that looked like a sort of great opportunity for all businesses to manage to keep people on but reduce their costs and look to be still operating in the future. I think as we start to hopefully see some light at the end of the tunnel, other businesses are all going back and they're getting revenue in, but travel is still struggling, still suffering. And one of the things about travel businesses, even during the sort of main part of lockdown, we still had to operate, whether you be a travel agent or a tour operator, because of all the cancellations, the refunds, everything else. So there's a lot of work been going on. Companies are having to spend money on staff, but not getting any money in, whilst we make sure that those cancellations are processed and customers get their money back. So that's one of the big areas. I think the government needs to seriously look very quickly at extending furlough or something similar for travel businesses, because it's taking longer for us to get back to normal, particularly given the current circumstances of sort of quarantine happening overnight, and no real certainty of when we'll be back to some form of normality.
Yeah. Chris, do you agree? Do you think furlough could be a real help for this industry? And, you know, the fact that the government does keep switching off destinations, do you think there is a real lack of understanding amongst ministers about the industry?
Definitely. I think right from the beginning, we've made it quite clear that furlough was great, but it really wasn't fit for purpose when you're looking at the travel industry. And as Giles said, if anything, we've been working harder and longer, and it was just impossible to sort of hibernate and furlough and make good use of it. And I think now that we're all trying to get things restarted and trying to open up destinations, it's almost even worse, because you're trying to get people on the phones to take new reservations. You're trying to still deal with deferrals and cancellations. And so there's sort of comments about our wait times on calls and that sort of thing. So we almost need double the amount of staff that we would normally have in this sort of scenario, but at the same time, you're still getting very little income, and if anything, paying out more than you're getting in, whilst at the same time having sort of set up costs for opening up destinations that could be turned off at any time. So the sort of the airports and the airlines and operators are all sort of investing in opening up destinations, only to find that within a couple of weeks they're turned off again. And it's this sort of push all the time. Do we spend that money in opening up, or do we sit back and sort of just try and ride it out?
And that's the challenge. Kelly, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, initially the support looked like it was going to be positive. We saw the furlough scheme, we had the CBILS, we then later had the bounce back loans. Unfortunately, because of the length of time this is now going on and the fact that destinations are opening and closing, most businesses, particularly from an agent point of view, have eaten well into those, or they are a distant memory. So I think now it's really becoming not so much about an extension of the furlough scheme, but potentially job preservation. So it's now, you know, do we lose the furlough word? Because I think they've been very clear in the government that they do not want to extend the furlough scheme. And maybe we start talking about that in a different way and saying, you know, this is now about preservation of jobs for our industry, given that we are in a very different environment in terms of being able to restart in. And really, we at the moment still don't have much view on when that wide scale restart will happen. We had a very positive stage where we got the list, albeit the list was not as we anticipated it would be. But since then, destinations have been coming on and off at such a rate that the consumer confidence is just so low that not only does it make booking new holidays a challenge, we're also still on that roundabout of trying to rebook holidays. And some agents and operators, I'm sure, have now done that 2 or 3 times with the same customer. And that, of course, is very, very resource heavy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the challenge that you flagged with the furlough scheme, of course, is that, as Chris pointed out, you know, you need almost extra staff to deal with everything. And of course, if we extend the furlough scheme, it will mean taking staff away. And while business money might be coming into the business, you're then losing the staff that you need to deal with it. And we had a TTG's seminar last Thursday. We had one of the speakers there was talking about what the Australian government's done. And actually, they're funding people to be in work. So they're still providing that revenue for businesses, that money coming into them, but enabling workers to still work, which is something that the travel industry would obviously really need. And it does seem that there is a lack of understanding in Westminster about the grave situation of the travel industry, but also how the travel industry works at all. Why is that? Why does our government in particular, because we don't seem to see that necessarily replicated around the world. There seems to have been much more support in certain European countries and countries like Australia for industries like their travel and tourism industry. What are we lacking? Giles?
I don't think the British government, over many governments, not just the current one, have ever really taken outbound or really inbound tourism that seriously. It's seen as a little bit of a frivolous sector. It's seen as a sort of nice to have. Certainly outbound, I think the view is that money is leaving the shores of the UK, so why should anybody support that from a governmental perspective? And I don't think there's a recognition of the contribution made to employment, to staff, and actually the desire of customers to have holidays. And actually, in a world where self-packaging and people putting their own stuff together has become bigger, actually the value of travel agents and tour operators has never been greater in terms of supporting customers who are traveling overseas. I don't think government are putting two and two together to understand what we do for customers, what we do for sort of UK PLC, and understanding what customers get on the back of that. And, you know, even some of the discrepancies within travel around, you know, the different rules that apply to a tour operator versus an airline. So if you take the current situation where the FCO are advising against all travel to France, as a tour operator, we are obliged to give money back, to the full refund to customers in that situation. Airlines are still flying to those places. They're not obliged to stop, and they're not obliged to refund if customers choose not to go. So there's all these discrepancies. So there's something about just reviewing the regulatory framework, because at the moment we're operating under completely different sort of framework, completely different rules, but within the same industry. So I can book a package, including a flight with an airline, and sell that to a customer. I get told tomorrow that I can't send people to a particular destination. I have to give that customer all their money back. The airline isn't obliged to refund me as a tour operator, and isn't obliged to refund customers who've booked direct with them. So there's some real strange discrepancies within this that need resolving, certainly into the future.
And of course, that doesn't help with the consumer trust element, does it? You know, we've already got this challenge with consumer trust as a result of the refund situation, and it doesn't really help to inspire much more confidence when you've got all of those different discrepancies, like you pointed out. Kelly, do you agree? Do we need to see a sort of widespread change in regulation and how the industry monitors and regulates itself?
I think so. I think there's a huge lack of understanding, and even at a consumer point. And I guess the one glimmer of positivity that we have seen out of this is that people are now more encouraged to use an agent, and we are seeing that, and they are understanding more what that bonded package means. However, yeah, there is a lack of understanding. For me, I think what we need to do now is to pick our battles. So we're not going to get all of these things looked at straight away, albeit we know that they all need looking at. So I think what we need to do as an industry is collaboratively choose that one big ticket item that we're all going to get behind, because as a government, they are getting pushed from various different sectors that need support. So we're only going to get so much airtime. So I think it's about really honing in on what that message is going to be and making sure that that is a very loud and clear message to them.
I mean, the other frustration the industry has, and Chris, I'm going to come to you now because you can talk about your own experiences, is that we've had all these quarantine measures, and yet at the airport, it doesn't seem to be that they're necessarily being enforced particularly well. Chris, talk to us about your travel experiences and the passenger locator form that you have only just had to fill out, although you've been traveling quite a bit this summer, I think.
Yeah, I mean, last night I flew into Heathrow, and that was the fourth time I'd flown into the UK, various different airports, and it was the first time that I'd actually been asked to produce a PLF. They do very well at sort of advertising it as you're coming through, saying, have you filled it out? But the reality is that nobody actually checks it, or hadn't done up until now. To check, you could have been filling out a shopping list, you could have been not bothering to do it at all. And it wasn't, even now as you go through the e-gates, if you've got the automatic e-gates, nobody gets checked and you just get to wander through. It was only the fact that I got pulled up to a desk last night because of a problem with my passport that it was actually checked. And it's been sort of, our customers are commenting the same. It's a very complicated form that takes a lot of time to fill out, and then they get back to the UK and they almost feel cheated. I mean, we've got customers that are sort of they like to follow the rules, and they're desperate for somebody to check that they've actually filled it out correctly, and there's just been no checks at all.
And how does that compare with, because you were in Corfu, I think, weren't you?
Yes.
How does that compare with your arrival in Corfu and the experience that you had, from the Greek authorities?
It's all very simple. You fill the form out 24 hours before departure, or at least 24 hours before departure. At 10 o'clock UK time, you get sent a response with a QR code on it, and then you just show that at check-in in the UK. And then before you're allowed into the airport on arrival in Greece, they check the QR code, and depending on whether they either send you for a sample test, or you get to carry on with the journey. And it's very straightforward. Everybody gets treated the same, and everybody knows what they're dealing with. And I don't think people mind sort of complying with all these regulations, as long as they feel that it's fair and they're doing it for a reason.
We've had a comment through actually from Howard Salinger, and he says, nobody checked my form when I came through the Eurotunnel last week either. I spent ages filling it out and they just asked if I'd done it. So there is that frustration, and you know, consumers are going to feel that frustration, let alone what this means for the industry. And Giles, you've just come back from France, haven't you? What was
I came back from France. I came back on Eurotunnel, and same. They didn't even ask to fill the form in. I filled the form in, all done, but no one asked. No one was interested. Might as well almost not have bothered. But I have to say, you know, one of the issues linked to this is the complete arbitrary nature of the quarantine process. You know, sort of moving on a little bit, but it seems to be very random. It seems to be very blanket. You know, to say a whole country you now can't travel to because there's a rising COVID infection in a couple of areas of that particular country. And when you compare it to the UK, where our COVID rates of infection are way higher anyway, even than some of the worst areas in Spain or France, it just seems to be a real knee-jerk. You know, it's very much taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's completely out of proportion to the size of the issue and the other measures that could be in place instead of a blanket quarantine process.
And there's an irony, because if you look at the sort of black and white instructions on the government site about the localised lockdowns that they're doing here, they say that you can travel outside of those areas if you have to stay in your bubble. But in theory, you could travel around the UK. So why are you allowed to do that? And yet you can't go to the entire country of France because of their rates of infection. It doesn't seem to necessarily tally with the advice that we're putting to British citizens here. Just to remind if anybody watching, we've got some comments coming through on Zoom, just to use the chat function in Facebook as well, should you want to put any questions to. I'm keeping an eye on my phone so I can see all of the comments coming through. So how do we sort of make ministers and the government more aware of this? I mean, Giles, you said it, you know, successive governments haven't listened to or even understood or taken the time to understand the complexities of the UK travel industry. And yes, you know, we have some challenges in that there is these kind of failures within the industry itself to regulate itself, perhaps, you know, fairly and justly all the time. But how do we make ministers listen to and understand the industry? Because as we come out of this crisis, we never really want to have these challenges again. We want to make sure that the government is aware. And there's been some people in the industry calling for a dedicated outbound tourism minister. Is that the answer? Because we haven't had one of those since 2011. Is that the solution, or what? Because the other frustration, you know, as we've got with our letter, is that our letter is directed at Rishi Sunak and Grant Shapps, because we try to get the broadest ministers we can. And obviously it's good to involve the Chancellor, but there is no one department that looks after the travel industry. And that's another frustration. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think, you know, we've been having the conversation about the dedicated tourism minister even before this started. And absolutely that is something I think that would add value and certainly make life a lot easier, especially if it was somebody that understood the industry. I do think that for now that probably isn't the top of the agenda, because we all know how long that would take to get into place, but it definitely needs to stay on the agenda. I think for me, for now, bearing in mind that it's a Tory government that we've got in, the best thing to do is to talk to them in a language that we think will get through. And that probably is around the risk to the economy of our sector disappearing, what it means in terms of job losses and what the impact on the economy will be. So I think really it's about coming up with a proposal that will be of interest to them. And that's probably where we should go now in order to get as much traction as we possibly can. And I think, you know, we're already moving down the path with that, with the petition and with the letter and with the piece of work that you're doing. But that is very much then starting to talk to them about the impact of what not doing anything could have.
Giles, would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah, very much. I'd agree with Kelly on that. I think the other thing is how we do it in a joined up way. You know, we've got, within travel, there's quite disparate bodies. We've got, if you like, ABTA as well, a trade organisation, there's ITT, then there's trade papers, and what you're doing I think is commendable. I think it's how we get that into a joined up voice to create the sort of pressure, enough pressure from one place rather than us all trying to sort of have touch points at different places. And the bit around the contacting MPs, I think one of the challenges with that is you'll only get a response from your MP in the constituency that you live. They're not, if you live in a different constituency to where your business is based, there's no point writing to the MP of your constituency, of your business. You've got to write to the MP where you live. And that creates a bit of a disconnect, because, you know, where I live is a long way from where my business is based. So I'm writing as me, and I'm writing as someone who runs a business, but I'm not representing a large number of people within their constituency who are being employed. And I think we need to try and find a way around that, because you just won't get a response. So where our office is in Bromley, if I write to the Bromley MP, I do not get a response.
That's good advice. I mean, for a lot of agents watching, especially home workers, but also for those that sort of have high street shops in their local areas, hopefully, you know, that they would have the same MP for where they live. And I would urge anybody who is watching that does have a business, because that is a really valid point, Giles, to write to your local MP. Well, apologies, you probably just heard the thunder clap outside my window. Just to write, just because, as Kelly pointed out, it's the economic impact that we have to get across to this government. But that is a really pertinent point. Thanks for that, Giles. And Chris, I don't know if you've had a chance to write to your local MP, or if you have the same challenge as Giles.
We have, and I think for the point that Giles mentioned, we've been sort of very clear to our local MP that we have sort of 100 staff that sort of use the facilities in the local area, and if we were to disappear, then that would have a huge impact on the local shops and sort of restaurants and that sort of thing that our team make use. So that was the approach that we've taken with our local MP for the business, and then. The problem is with writing to the MPs, all of our team have done it, and you can see no matter what the MP, with very few exceptions, you get the same stock answer, and it's almost a copy and paste response that they've been told to respond with, and so you almost think it's pointless. And as I say, with a few exceptions, that's been across the board.
Although I would say it's not pointless, because to your point, I mean, my response from my MP, because I've written to her, was abysmal, and I'm going to be challenging her because I just don't think it's good enough. And I think we should challenge, you know, if we don't think it's good enough, because we have seen actually several responses from MPs, including to one of the TTG team, which was actually quite important. They said that they're going to flag it with the Transport Minister, with Grant Shapps. They do want to know about the economic impact of the area. They are really concerned. So you do get some who are much more passionate about their area than others.
And I think those are the ones that we need to sort of focus on and pick them out, because they're the routes where you're most likely to get some sort of response, and they're the MPs that we need to work on.
And there's something whether we can find one or two MPs who are sympathetic to what we're trying to do, and try and set up an all-party parliamentary group, because I think that is the way to start to get things done within Westminster. We need some insiders to liaise with us and work with us as a business, as an industry, to then get them bringing other MPs on board to start a working group to then look at what can be done.
And to that point, actually, I don't know if you saw, but I interviewed the Shadow Transport Secretary a few weeks ago, Jim McMahon, and he is sympathetic to the cause. So although he's in the shadow government, admittedly, so not as helpful, but it is exactly that. It's about trying to get MPs to support us. If anybody watching does have a sympathetic MP, please do get them on side, get them to sign the letter. You know, let's try and get these issues flagged. Oh, I can see someone has just asked, you mentioned resource to finding out where our local MP is. Where is that, please? I will tell you where that is. That is on savetravel.co.uk. If you click on there, we've created a whole host of resources. So you can find your local MP, you can find a draft letter to send to your local MP. We've written everything out, including what our demands are and what the situation is. So please do use that. Someone says, are you suggesting we do an individual letter personally to our local MP as well as sign the petition? Yes, we are saying exactly that. Sign the petition. The petition is directed at Grant Shapps, where she's soon up with collecting thousands of signatures that we can then present that letter to. And yes, we want you to demonstrate the economic impact to your local MP. Penny says also tweet them, which is a good point actually, because if you are getting pathetic responses, as in the case of my MP, then if you tweet them, because I think they're more likely to respond on social media. And Penny Gray actually is one such person who had a fantastic response from her MP, and they have committed to raising it with Grant Shapps, which is really powerful. Just moving away a little bit from the government side of things, you know, there's been a huge challenge on the mental health side of things, and we wrote about this in TTG last week. We had some really powerful pieces and comments from people in the industry who have, you know, been affected horribly by this devastating crisis. it'd be great if you guys are able to just share about, you know, the personal challenges that you've all experienced over the recent months, because the hours that you all, as well as all your teams, have had to work, you know, have been huge. And talk to us about how you dealt with the stresses of these crises and how you've been looking after your employees, you know, at this really tough time. So there's any tips for people watching that might be able to sort of look after others in their business and colleagues?
We were hit quite early on in that we lost our FD in the first week of lockdown, and so it was a really tough time. Not only we all sort of disappeared to our kitchens or bedrooms to work, so we were all isolated. We then had the situation where there was a week of sickness, and then sort of 2 weeks later he sadly passed away. And it was that sort of how do you deal with sort of announcing to the team over Zoom that you've lost a friend and colleague, and then how do you follow that one up afterwards? And so it was really important that we did have a support sort of system in place, whether that be a buddy system or that sort of thing. But we also introduced a challenge, which at the time I didn't realize what an effect it would have, but we introduced a challenge where we all did sort of exercise on a daily basis, and everybody would report that back. And it was actually a race around the Greek islands to raise money. But the side effect from that was that it really did help sort of people to get through, and it gave them a focus point. And I think there was people that had, including myself, that had very dark days, but it just gave you a focus point, something to focus on and something to sort of ease you through. And now we look back on May, sort of the month of May when we were doing it, and it did seem a lot easier because we were focusing on something outside of the business, and it was something that we were all focusing on together. So that's been quite important for us.
Were the exercise sessions all together kind of on Zoom, or everyone did them individually and then sort
of... No, everybody just had, the majority of us loaded up Strava on our phones, and then we sort of, every morning we had a Zoom call, which we continued to do right through. So we have a 9 a.m. Zoom call, and then everybody was just sort of logging in, checking out what other people had done. And it just sort of made it something that everybody could focus on and work towards together, really.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chris. That's really powerful. Giles, what about Cosmos? How have you been looking after employees there?
It's been tough. Again, you know, suddenly you go from everyone working in office to everyone working from home. So we've ramped up the level of communication. We used to do a monthly sort of all staff update in one place. We now do that fortnightly, just keeping people up to speed on what's happening in the business. I've been doing quite regular sort of little video messages. I then WhatsApp out to the whole team, just of, you know, what's going on in the business, and just that sort of personal update from me. We've increased the number of one-to-ones, Zoom team meetings. So to me, it's about communication. You know, quite often you find in businesses, people complain, even when they're office-based, that communication is not good in a business. So we've been more focused than ever on telling people what's happening, being really open and honest about the impact on the business, the impact on our customers, the decisions we're sort of toying with and going to have to make. We had to make some redundancies back in June, but we did that, I think, in a very open, honest, caring manner. We really looked after people. We are regularly communicating, you know, what's coming up, the changes that may or may not need to be made, the things we're thinking about. So I think we probably, I mean, part of our business ethos is about being open and honest with our people. And I think probably even more than normal, we are just sharing all the thoughts, all the sort of ideas, all the plans that we have, and, you know, the good and the bad, so that people understand what's happening. And I think our HR managers have been very good at going out and sourcing things to help people with sort of mental health, well-being, coming up with lots of suggestions and ideas. So on a weekly basis, we do something every Friday afternoon, send out something called Reasons to be Cheerful, where we celebrate successes around the business and things that people have done. And we've just actually last week completely reformatted that and focused even more on people's sort of personal achievements and asking people to put that in to share with the business. So that goes out every Friday afternoon. So we're just really focusing on trying to maintain a culture and everybody involved, whether they be on furlough or whether they be working.
And that positivity, that's nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kelly, what about you? Because there's two kind of strands here. It's how has Advantage kind of looked after each other at Advantage HQ, but also how have you been looking after members during these tough times?
And I would echo both of the comments on communication. That's been key. We've done group Zoom exercise sessions. I'm using the royal we there. I've not taken part in those, but I believe they have happened. Quizzes and things like that. But I think really, probably outside of that, the key things have been empathy, understanding, flexibility. So on a personal level, this time last year, I was just coming back from maternity leave. So fast forward 6-7 months, I certainly did not think that myself and my husband would be working full-time from home with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old bouncing round. So the first few months for our team were lots of children interrupting calls, pets, while we found a way of balancing. So I think there did have to be a lot of understanding and flexibility around how that worked. We've also been having a lot of tough conversations with members. You know, these are people's livelihoods, they're their businesses, they're passionate about them, they've put years of work into them, and those conversations have been taking place right from the beginning and at all hours of the day, and that's important. That's what we want to do, and now more than ever we want to be taking those calls whenever that member needs us. So we had to be flexible with the team to enable them to be able to do that, and then also fit in their lives around that as well and their commitments. So that's been quite key for us, and I think actually being able to be there for the members, whether that's via phone, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's a messenger or a WhatsApp, that has been the piece that's been the most important to us throughout this, looking after them and looking after colleagues.
There's someone to talk to.
It's just sharing experiences. You know, members do speak to each other, but sometimes they just want to know that what they're going through isn't impacting just them, and they do want to talk to us. And you know, sometimes it is just a bit of a chat, a bit of reassurance, sharing of ideas, and that's what we're there for. So we've all been on the phones pretty much 24/7 since this started, and we'll continue to do that for as long as we need to.
Is that Giles or Chris, you were going to make a point?
Yeah, so I was just going to say there's also something around the sort of shared experience, but sharing, you know, it's okay not to be okay. You know, I think everyone in this sort of environment with this level of uncertainty and the sort of, you know, the dread of what may or may not be coming, or the fear of what may or may not be coming, I think gives everyone sleepless nights, makes everyone worry about, you know, will I be able to pay my bills? What about feeding the family? And I think for everybody to understand, you know, within business, it's not just, you're not on your own feeling like that. We all feel like that. And there's something just about that sort of greater degree of openness and saying, you know, I'm worried about that too. You know, we all are. And I don't think that's weakness. I think it's just being honest and sort of sharing that it's okay to feel like that because it's natural.
And that's actually what we want to champion on Friday, that, you know, nobody is alone in this crisis. Everybody is in this together. And if you are worried about any colleagues, do reach out and support them. And if you yourself are suffering, please don't suffer in silence. You know, reach out and talk to others, because to Giles's point, you know, we're all in this together and everybody's there to listen and help one another.
The big thing right now as well, sorry to interrupt, the big thing right now is that we're all used to dealing with crises that last, whether that's a failure or whatever else. It's a short-term thing. We know there's always going to be an end to it, and we're going to come out the other side. I think the thing we're all experiencing at the moment, we were all very good at the beginning at setting up these programs and doing sort of the mental health updates and that sort of thing. And now we realise that we're sort of 6 months into it and there's still no end in sight. And we've got staff that have been working around the clock right the way back from the beginning just to keep everything running. And they're sort of, their view has always been, I want to keep the business going and I want to do my best and everything else. And we're now having to say, well, you've been doing this constantly for the last 6 months. And so it's not only your mental sort of well-being, it's physical and everything else. And you do need to take time out. And we're having to almost force people to take holiday to sort of look after themselves from that aspect as well. And I think because we don't know sort of how long this is going to go on for, we need to sort of say, okay, we're drawing a line under it. We've gone through that initial first stage, and now we need to sort of think more long term and how we're going to look after people sort of over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, to make sure it's not just a short-term thing, that this is a commitment to the team.
Yeah.
We have had a question in, it's from Amy Wright, just asking about this point about airport testing, which I know some in the industry are calling for, and whether it's better to call for, well, she says double testing and shorter quarantine periods in the first instance. I mean, I know a lot of countries are trialling airport testing. Germany certainly has it. France, I think, had it in place, or was aiming to have it in place for the 1st of August. Just what are your thoughts on airport testing and whether that's something that the industry should be pushing? I know Heathrow is planning a trial of it. It'd be great to hear all of your thoughts. Who wants to take this?
I think it's a solution. I think we need, I think that it's almost so it's trying to it's trying to sort of compensate for the bigger issue. The bigger issue is, the random quarantine with very short notice without any real science behind it. I think we've got to sort of take it back a stage and say, okay, well, if we're going to do something, let's be really focused. And this is a hotspot. We know it's a hotspot. So let's focus on that hotspot. I think airport testing is a really good idea, but I think it needs to be part of a bigger package. I don't think on its own it's the answer. I mean, I had to say, I flew through Italy twice in late February and early March. They had every arriving passenger had to walk through heat screening. So they were doing stuff back in early February, late February, early March, before we even got into lockdown. And I do think, I think another area we've been failed. The government has had now 5 or 6 months to get this right and plan for it. We had 5 or 6 months of hundreds of thousands of people arriving into the UK without any testing, without any quarantine, without anything else, when we were really in the epicenter of the sort of COVID crisis. And I think, it's a failure that we are where we are now without any proper process in place.
Any proper plan, for how this is going to continue. Chris, what are your thoughts on airport testing?
Yeah, again, it's a solution, and we've seen it through other airports around Europe and around the world, and I think it is part of a bigger process. My concern is that what damage is being done to FCO advice at the moment, in that it's always been the trusted go-to source for people deciding whether they should and shouldn't travel, and now we're finding that it's a case of people are looking for loopholes to get away with how they can travel, even though the FCO advice is not to travel. And I think it's damaging that source of information. And it's where we go to try and rebuild that. And it does need to be a package of probably sort of area specific targeting, and say if people are coming in from this area, then they need to be quarantined or they need to have tests. And it just needs to be looked at as a whole and decide what's going to be the most effective. Because I think the point that keeps getting missed is this current system, it's not effective at all, because the tests aren't being made, it's not being policed, and it's just really as though it's a visible thing that the government think that it's sort of a paying lip service to the whole thing, and they're making the announcement, but underneath there's nothing to actually sort of make sure that it's actually being done properly. So whatever we do, it needs to be followed through, and we need to make sure that if it's testing or whatever else, it's done in a way that is balanced, that enables to businesses to restart, travel to restart, because this is going to be a long-term thing. I don't think it's going to finish anytime soon. So it needs to be something that's long-term sustainable and allows us to restart travel and slowly build up again.
Yeah, and the quarantine situation isn't sustainable at the moment, is it? It does seem like a PR gimmick. The government got it in the net for handling this crisis terribly. Quarantine measures should have been put in place in March. Doing it now is too little too late, but it just makes it look like they're doing something. Because they've eroded so much trust in public confidence. Kelly, your thoughts on that?
I think the confidence piece is key, really. I think there's so many mixed messages out there for consumers at the moment. We've got a list which keeps changing. We're then looking at 14-day cumulative rates and 7-day cumulative rates. We then got the FCO saying something that might not mirror what we're saying externally. The media are reporting every day that a different destination could go on or off the list. And when you throw in airport testing as well, I mean, we're confused in the industry. So I'm not sure how a consumer's ever going to understand, A, where they should be going, and B, feel secure that, it's safe for them to travel. So for me, it's about coming up with something that is really clear and simple to understand for a consumer, so that they feel comfortable to start traveling again, because we know there's pent-up demand. We know people want to travel. I myself am going away next Friday. But the amount of people that I've spoken to within my friend and family group that are quite shocked that I feel comfortable doing that, despite the fact that the destination is on the list that it's okay to go to, is quite surprising. And when you dig deeper, it all comes back to the fact they're confused. They don't really understand what's going on, or why we're allowed to send hundreds of thousands of people to pack out the beaches on Cornwall, yet they can't go to Ibiza where they've only had 3 deaths in the last X amount of weeks and the beaches are empty. I think we just need to come up with some kind of messaging that makes consumers feel comfortable with what they can do, and then make them want to do it, really, and reignite that passion for travel within the general public.
Yeah, that passion and that confidence in the industry.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
Are you able to say where you're going on holiday?
I'm going to Turkey. So we were actually due to be going to Canada. So we are one of the people that's done a switch, but we still absolutely want to get away. So we're going to Turkey. And like I say, there's been a lot of people that have said, oh, well, is it safe? What part are you going to? What's it going to be like? And I've sort of been saying, you know, we understand that it's going to be different, but different's still okay. You can still go and enjoy that experience. But I think the more we can make that process clear for consumers, and then also the more we can share, and the industry's been great at that, sharing our experiences of going overseas and having a good trip, that can only be a good thing as well.
And you said the experience will be different, but everything's different. You know, even in the UK, you know, you wear masks to the supermarket. You know, there's no, you know, it's just the same experience but abroad. So it's, yeah.
It doesn't have to be worse. It's just different, and understanding what that is like. And you're absolutely right. Going to Asda at the moment is a completely different experience.
Yeah.
So I think as long as people understand what that experience will be and they're prepared for it, then they can still go away and enjoy that trip. And the more that we share ourselves doing that, our customers doing that, that will start to reignite that confidence. But I think the clarity around the information that consumers are getting has to go hand in hand with that, really.
Yeah, I can see it away, so I'm conscious we should probably end this relatively soon. But before we go, just some final thoughts on what people watching can be doing to #SaveTravel. Ways, any tips or advice that you might have on ways that they can kind of amplify the campaign? You know, we've talked about your local MP. It's demonstrating the economic impact, the personal stories, you know, the mental health toll this has taken, because that's one way of government finally understanding just how devastating this has been for people. Any other tips or advice from any of you for anyone watching?
I would say that if people are in a financial situation to do so, we should be travelling ourselves. We should be going to destinations so that we can know firsthand. You know, I came back from France, whatever, a week before the quarantine. Nothing will have changed in that week. And I've seen what happened in France, Italy and Switzerland in that holiday, what they were doing around protocols, masks, gel, social distancing. I've stayed in hotels, I've stayed in mountain refuges, I flew, I went on Eurotunnel, you know, and I think we need to be able to talk knowledgeably about, you know, even if France is now on the quarantine list, actually everything that's happening there is probably, it's better protocols than we've even got here in your local town in the UK. And I think as travel people, we need to understand that and be able to explain that really clearly, because I think the risk is, you know, in the past, back to Chris's point, the FCO has always been the trusted source. And if the FCO say don't go somewhere, it's because it's a war zone generally. It's not because it's the same as it is here. And I think there's something around how we let people know that booking is safe with us, it's safe with the tour operator, safe with the travel agent, that if you can't go for whatever reason, you will get a refund, you will get your money back. But actually, if you go, you will have as good an experience as you always will have had. And it's no worse, and in most cases, probably a better setup and better protocols than you will have in your local town.
Brilliant, thank you, Giles. Chris, any final points to add on that?
And just picking up on Kelly's points as well about reigniting that passion, I suppose the same with Giles's point there, is it's how to sort of reignite that passion for travel. And we've been doing the same with our guests on the fact that a lot of their trusted travel companies that they love to travel with year on year could disappear if something's not done. And it is all about that. Our guests come back year after year after year, and they love traveling with us. And it's just how you sort of get them to amplify the message out as well. And so we've been doing a lot of sort of Facebook posts and sort of my experience of traveling, other team members' experience of traveling, A, to get them back into the mindset of traveling again, but B, to sort of get them to understand that without sort of some support, a lot of the companies that they like to travel with may disappear. And it's trying to sort of build that whole into one big message. I think we're in a time at the moment where big business is almost sort of hated. It's that sort of Trump stroke post-Brexit area where people don't like to feel that businesses are being supported. And so if we can turn that into a consumer message where it's sort of trying to give support back to the businesses that they like to travel with. It just makes the messaging better.
Especially if they want to be travelling with those businesses this time next year.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And Kelly, any final comments to add on that?
I think the sharing of experiences is key. We've all talked about that, and we've had a couple of members of our team that have gone overseas already, and they've taken footage and done an update for members. I'm seeing lots of members sharing footage as well, and I think that, you know, that is not down to the organisation that you're part of or you work with. I think everyone's been really good at sharing each other's footage just to get the message out there. The other thing that we've been doing internally is working really hard to encourage as much flexibility as possible. So that goes back again to the consumer confidence piece, knowing that if something does happen, they've got the flexibility to move their destination or move their date, and to educate them that just because you've booked to go to destination X, if things change and you're uncomfortable, you're not stuck. You can still go on your holiday and you can go to somewhere else. So again, I think it's just that piece around confidence, reassuring them that money's safe and that they'll still have options.
Yeah, the flexibility piece is really key, isn't it, if we want to rebuild consumer confidence in the industry. Thank you very much, all three of you. Apologies if you could hear the thunderclaps. I know I want to go on my holiday because there's a lot of torrential rain outside. But just a reminder as well for everybody watching, this is #Safe Travel Week. We've got things going on every single day. Tomorrow, we want you to be spreading the Safe Travel word, sign our letter to Sunak and Shaps. Wednesday, share your stories. We want to hear your personal stories of the impact on you. We know this has been devastating for so many of you, and that's one way that we can get that message to Westminster. Thursday, it's Write to Your Local MP Day. We've got the template letter. We've got the link as to how to find your MP. Just go to safetravel.co.uk. All the resources are there. And on Friday, we want to make sure that everyone is reaching out to support one another in this industry because of the mental health toll that this crisis has had. If you're struggling, please, please don't do it alone. So do visit safetravel.co.uk and let's everybody unite and let's all work to save travel. Thanks very much, and thank you to our panel.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.